Hi, this is Dr. Tony Cooper, and this is Life Without Baggage. In this podcast, I'll help you develop a stronger sense of self, develop firmer boundaries, and also learn how to lean into the gentle promptings of the Holy Spirit who can help you navigate life. My purpose is to help you get free from the emotional baggage that weighs you down so that you can be fully alive and engaged in life. My media includes audiobooks, self-help books, videos, and this podcast. Just a reminder before we get into today's episode that this is not a substitute for medication or counseling. If you're having thoughts of harming yourself or another person, or if this material triggers you, please contact your doctor or a mental health specialist to help you with your concerns. Now, here's today's episode. Have you ever heard of Henry Box Brown? Henry Brown was a slave in Virginia. He was owned by a different slave master than his wife and his children. So after the master of his wife and children sold them, he decided he was getting out of slavery. So what he came up with was he had a crate constructed, and then he shipped himself to Philadelphia to the address of some abolitionists. So that was pretty creative, and I guess he was pretty determined. So the size of the crate was 3 feet by 2.5 feet by 2 feet, which that's pretty small. So I can't even imagine how cramped and uncomfortable that would be. He had it labeled, fragile and this side up. And in spite of that, of course, parts of the trip were upside down and sort of tossed around. And the trip took 27 hours. And there are some other details about what he went through to get free that I'm not going to read. But this is a person who was determined to get free, and he accomplished it. So that's how he got the nickname Box, because he found his freedom through constructing a box that shipped him. So most of us have not been through anything that extreme, but most of the people I meet, many of you listening, have been through some type of really difficult situation, maybe some kind of trauma in your early life or adult life, and you're looking for ways to get free. One of the ways that people don't get free is they don't learn to change their thinking. So it makes sense to think a certain way. We're going to develop certain types of emotions, certain types of thinking when we've been through really difficult or traumatic experiences, especially if they started early in life. But in order to get free, we generally have to change aspects of that thinking. Otherwise, if you think like a victim, you're probably going to be either re-victimized or you're never really going to live. So I don't want to minimize anything that people have been through, but I also know that if you're going to enjoy your life, if you're going to move forward, if you're going to live in the present with any measure of peace and positivity, there are things in a person's thinking that need to change. So I'm going to share with you some different aspects of thinking that often need to change for a person to move out of victimization and have the power to change. So this is really about changing our thinking so that we can move forward. So one of the things that is very common is a person who is still living in the old ways of thinking. They tend to be more passive. In other words, they're not looking for ways to be proactive. They're not looking for ways or strategies or options. They kind of just throw their hands up. Now, you've heard me talk about learned helplessness, and most of the time I use the example of how elephants are trained for the circus. But I'm not going to do that today because you're probably tired of that by now. So, the example that uh, the research by Dr. Seligman is based on actually looked at dogs. I'm going to give you a very, very brief summary of that research. So there were basically three groups of dogs. One group of dogs did not receive any kind of electric shock. I don't think they'd be allowed to do this now, but this is what they were doing back in the 60s. So I'm not saying this was good. I'm just reporting the information. And if you are a big time animal lover, you might want to advance about a minute or two. So one group of dogs did not get any shock. A second group of dogs had an experience of a shock. They were in a metal cage, but they could learn to control the shock and get out. The third group of dogs could not control the shock. So when they were put into a different cage, when the shock would start, when they were in the cage where they could have escaped, they just stayed in one place and waited for it to be over. So, this is the idea of being passive. When too many things happen, we can sort of give up looking for a way through or a way out and just kind of wait and hope that things get better. But that doesn't really lead to confidence or really any kind of joy in living. We're being controlled by circumstances or by other people. So it's important to learn to be a little more proactive. Another aspect of that is people may hope instead of plan. One quote that I came across that I actually had posted on my bulletin board back when I was a school teacher, that was my first career. It said, "He who aims at nothing is sure to hit it." So I developed the idea early in life that if I want to accomplish anything, I'm going to have some goals. And so we need to have some realistic goals. If we're just hoping or waiting or thinking someday, it's really unlikely that those things are going to develop. So we want to have some realistic goals and some steps to get there. When we live from crisis to crisis, as opposed to learning from our mistakes and thinking, why does this keep happening? What do I need to do differently? When we don't do any self reflection of why does this keep happening, then we're kind of doomed to stay in whatever place that is. Many times when a person comes to me for counseling, they realize something keeps happening over and over, the same kind of problem in their relationships, the same kind of argument with their adult child or their partner, or the same kind of issue with an employer. And so they realize there's something they're repeating and they don't know how to interrupt it. So sometimes we might need an outside person to help us. Or sometimes we know I keep picking the same kind of situation, or I settle for this, or I give advice and I know that this person doesn't like it. So we need to kind of recognize what mistake are we repeating, and then what do we need to do differently so that we don't keep landing in that same pothole. It's like when I'm driving to work, there's one place where there's a pothole, and I hit it a few times. And finally, after a while, I thought, I need to make a mental note where this is so I can go around it next time. And we all have things like that in our personal lives. Another area that we really need to challenge the way we think is how we view ourselves. Now, most people have been through something difficult, some kind of rejection, some kind of failure. We all do. But if we view ourselves and label ourselves as empty, broken, damaged, weak, that is pretty difficult to change. I challenge people in my office and I catch myself. When I am labeling myself in kind of a black or white, kind of all or nothing, counterproductive way, then there are other terms we can use that are kinder and more realistic as we move from strength to strength and glory to glory. Maybe I am vulnerable. Maybe I'm growing. Maybe I'm humble. These are things that are not necessarily bad. They're more hopeful. They're more positive. So instead of saying I'm broken, I can say I feel pretty vulnerable. Instead of saying I'm empty, I can say I'm having a struggle. I need some coping strategies. So again, these are subtle, maybe not so subtle. But if this is something you do with yourself a lot, labels and thinking that are kind of all or nothing and very kind of like the door is slammed shut, there's no wiggle room here. You want to start to work with how you think about yourself, especially. When we change how we think about ourselves, then a lot of other things are possible. I've talked frequently about the role of judgments and vows. What I just read to you about those judgments of being empty, broken, weak, a failure, those are judgments. Judgments against ourselves, our future, against whole classes of like all men, all women. Those aren't useful. They slam the door and they make for a very rigid kind of approach to life. And we need flexibility to be effective, and we need flexibility to help us grow. So there are things that are black and white. I think there are moral issues that are black and white, but a lot of life is gray. So we need to be able to operate in a more flexible framework. So let me give you an example of that. A lot of times people will come into my office and they tell me, really heartbreaking things of how they were spoken to by a partner, by a spouse, by a parent. And I ask people, what were the labels? What were the names that were used? Because I would like to know that. And then we can pray and break up that. But when we agree with it and live in it as though this is the truth and this is how it's always going to be, that just closes, again, it closes all the doors. It creates a prison. We don't want to live in a definition someone else gave us, especially if that person is sort of toxic. Most of the time, I can joke with my clients and I'll say, okay, so let's say this parent or this partner, they have some kind of problem. They're very angry. They maybe have an alcohol problem or some kind of addictive problem. They've never lived up to their potential. They're just very negative, very hard to be around. Is that the person we want to use for our definition of your value and worth? Is that the standard you want to use? And usually people will start laughing. It's like, no, that doesn't make sense. So we don't want to be defined by anybody but Jesus Christ. So yes, those things hurt, but we don't want to live in that. So I did some episodes on breaking soul ties and overcoming rejection. If this is a real difficult problem for you, you might want to listen to those, because you don't need to let anybody else define you. You are a separate, authentic person. God created you with your own unique identity, your own unique destiny, and with dignity. So we don't want to be torn down and stay down by a toxic person from our past. And finally, another way of thinking that we want to counter so that we can move forward, we have the power to move forward, is think about any vows that you have made. I talk about this regularly because it comes up all the time. I will never trust. I will never let anybody close to me. I will never let anybody hurt me again. I will never say what I think. These again, we're told in the scriptures not to make vows because vows, there are good vows like a wedding vow, or, you might take an oath of office. But these kind of vows are talking about all or nothing thinking that's very negative. It comes out of fear or anger. And again, it creates a cage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from pages 44 and 45 from the book Life Without Baggage. It's what this podcast was named after. And if this is something that you want to do, if you want to break with some of these old ways of thinking that tie you into bad experiences that block you from moving forward, then I would encourage you to pray this with me. So this is from the book Life Without Baggage. So Lord, I ask you to help this person who's listening to be able to recognize whatever they need to do to relinquish an old way of thinking, a vow, an attitude that isn't serving them and that is keeping them down, and that they would release it to you right now. I renounce. That means I don't want anything to do with it. Any unhealthy vows I have made, knowingly or unknowingly, not to feel, not to trust, not to try, not to hope. This doesn't mean we should trust everybody. We need to take each situation and person separately. But a vow treats everything like it's the same. And that isn't how life is. Life is more complex than that. I renounce any false beliefs I've accepted from other people about my worth. I renounce all of the lies and judgments that I once accepted, that I'm worthless, that I'm stupid, that I'm ugly, that I'll never be loved, taken on from loss, rejection, or criticism from another person in my past. I renounce judgments I have made against men, against women, against people, life, or even you, Lord. Please forgive me and remove the layers of judgment I have accepted over myself or placed over others. I thank you for your shed blood that cleanses me and frees me to see clearly. I ask you, Lord, to break any deep hidden connections I have made between you and harsh authority figures, parents, spouses, or people who have expected too much and given back too little to me. You could name those people. Lord, you are not a flawed human being that you would lie to me, use me, neglect me, or get tired of me. You love me more than I love myself. I repent for the things I've projected onto you that began with other people or within myself. I ask you to fill every dark, empty, or wounded place in my heart with your love that casts out fear, your peace that calms me, the faith that you want good things for me, the discernment to love and trust wisely, and the promise that in you my future is brighter than my past. Show me what to let go of and what to pursue. Give me a heart of wisdom. Please knit me back together as you intended me to be, fully alive in body, soul, and spirit. Please enable me to love you, myself, and others with a whole heart. I ask you to fill me with your spirit and your resurrection life so I can be fully alive in this new season. Show me, Lord, anything else you want me to know or to see today. Thank you that it's your will that I be fully alive in you without baggage. So I hope you feel lighter and more hopeful after this episode. So this is Dr. Tony Cooper, and this is Life Without Baggage. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.